Thank you, Michael, and welcome everyone. So firstly, it's always an honour to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region. We live, work and play on Kaurna land. Gawler is a very, very special place in Aboriginal history. It is a meeting place. It continues to be a meeting place, and long may that continue. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Deputy Premier, Dr. Susan Close. It's an absolute privilege to have you here on such an auspicious occasion. I haven't seen Tony. Is Tony Piccolo here? I haven't seen him, but I will acknowledge Tony. He's a great supporter of this particular launch. Dr. Christy Cockaguy, have I said that right? Not quite, no. Had a good crack, but yeah. Representing Greg Mackey, who's the CEO of the History Trust. Is Dr. Bruce Eastick here today, AM? Dr. Bruce Eastick is well known in Gawler. He's an elder statesman and highly regarded in our community and across the state. Mr. John Clift, is Mr. John Clift here? Oh, there you are, right front and centre. Absolutely beautiful to see you, John. John is a past president of the renowned Institute Committee and has been an active supporter and archivist of Gawler's history for over 60 years. I'd just like to give it up for John Clift. He's absolutely an amazing individual. I actually put these two together we were trying to work it out about 8 years ago in Norwood St Peter's Payneham in the old town hall, and I introduced them. Anyway, that's history. So Ephraim Henry Coombe is a significant person in the history of Gawler and the state of South Australia. He was a journalist, long-term editor of our Bunyip newspaper and Member of Parliament representing the Barossa district, which Gawler was part of. He used his position of influence to champion many social causes. These included temperance, votes for women, and the defence of those who were persecuted during the World War I period because of their German heritage. He opposed conscription and the closure of Lutheran schools. He was a strong and compassionate community leader who was willing to stand up for his beliefs, even at great personal cost. His story is not as well known as it should be, and so for a number of years the town of Gawler has been supporting projects to raise awareness of E.H. Coombe and his contributions. In 2016, Helen, Hennessy and Patricia Booth received a grant from the Historical Society to undertake research on E.H. Coombe. They were also the recipients of a Town of Gawler Community Grant. These funds were used to develop a walking tour of the areas of Gawler that were associated with Coombe and his story. The walking tour brochure was launched at a civic event to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the death of E.H. Coombe on the 5th of April 2017. Since that time, the walking tour brochure has been reprinted many times and is available through our very own Visitor Information Centre. It's now also available as a digital interactive walking tour. I'm sure if E.H. Coombe was with us today, he would appreciate the learning, even if he was bemused by the technology. In writing and researching the life of Coombe, Helen and Patricia soon realised that to truly do it justice to the story, they would need to eventually produce a manuscript, and that has led to the book we are excitedly launching today. How appropriate is it that we are gathered here in the Institute Hall, this building that was so familiar and so important to E.H. Coombe. The story of E.H. Coombe is strongly connected to Gawler. He was born here and he spent 56 of his 58 years living here. He ran a family business in the main street. He was president of the Gawler Institute and editor of the Bunyip newspaper, which is still going strong and celebrating 160 years in 2023. He was energetically involved in sporting, literary and social clubs. He was active in educational and cultural activities. There was something about Gawler at that time that nurtured E.H. Coombe and enabled his high level of integrity and his strong sense of social justice to develop. It was an amazing time in the history of our town. Just like to welcome Tony, who's just walked in. Welcome, Tony Piccolo. He was enthusiastically committed to this community and its growth and improvement. In conducting their research, Helen and Patricia spent time in our Cultural Heritage Research Centre down in the lower ground floor of this building, accessing items from the Gawler Heritage Collection that were directly associated with Coombe. Some of those items are on display here today in the James Martin room just behind you. They have also included photographs from the collection in the book, photographs that were not available anywhere else and which may have ceased to exist if the Gawler Institute and people like John Clift and Laurie Ronan, the late great Laurie Ronan, had not carefully collected and cared for them. That is the importance of great historical collections. They further our understanding. They allow us access to primary evidence, the documents and objects of the past, to rare things that may not exist anywhere else. This enhances academic research and understanding. It teases out our stories that are little known or even unknown and makes them available for future generations. The research and stories that Helen and Patricia have presented in this book will allow us to better understand Coombe and his significant contribution to the community of our town called Gawler, but also his public life. We will be able to appreciate that role that Gawler played in shaping the man and the role that he played in supporting the wider community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Redmond. A lovely, lovely speech. Our next speaker is Dr. Christy Kakagi. Christy I've known for a long time from the History Trust of South Australia, which was far-sighted and wise enough to provide some grant money towards Patricia and Helen's book. I'm just thinking, Christy, with the History Trust sort of on the move at the moment, and hearing Karen speak and reading books like Pat and Helen's, and think of the history of the Gawler Institute, that perhaps the History Trust might decide rather to head up from Grenfell Street and make its new home here. Probably cheaper than wherever you're going to go, possibly. Anyway, Christy I've known for a long time as a real force for good in history in South Australia and within the History Trust of South Australia. So thank you, Christy.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll try and stay off my soapbox. I love history and I get very passionate, so I'm going to try and contain myself. Those of you who know me, I speak with my hands. But good afternoon. I'd also like to acknowledge that the land we gather on today is the land of the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And to recognise that the land that we stand here on today, and that we celebrate this wonderful history, and we celebrate Gawler, and we celebrate all this amazing stuff, and this civic centre, which is just fabulous, but that we recognise that this land was never ceded, and that we have this rich First Nations culture and practice, and this special meeting place, and a long, deep history of this place. And I'm really, really fortunate to work for the History Trust of South Australia, where our commitment to truth-telling about South Australian history hopefully goes some way to helping us all understand, heal and move forward together. I'd also like to acknowledge the number of distinguished guests with us today. The Honourable Dr. Susan Close MP, Deputy Premier. Did I hear that Tony Piccolo MP has just arrived this afternoon? Mayor of Gawler, Karen Redmond. Our authors, Helen and Patricia. You're just Pat to me, I'm sorry. I can't do Patricia. I wrote it out, but you're Pat. But Helen and Patricia, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As Michael said, I'm here representing the History Trust of South Australia to say a few words on behalf of our Chief Executive, Greg Mackey, OAM, who I'm sure is no stranger to most of you. My name is Christy Kokigi. I'm the Head of Audience and Experience at the History Trust, and that can mean all sorts of things. I like to think it means I get to do all the fun stuff. I get to play with our curators, I get to play with our digital team and make really cool things and bring history to life and get out in the community, which is where I've met many of you. There's many familiar faces in the crowd. And I get to our education team who are currently making these museum-in-a-box escape rooms, and we've got this new escape room, Escape from Torrens Island, which is perhaps quite topical at the moment. But we just get to do fun stuff and bring history to life every day, and I'm so fortunate. And I get to come out to the community and travel all across South Australia and work with so many passionate people about their local history and about South Australia's place in the world. So thank you. And to the authors, Helen and Pat, I have written Patricia. You have to bear with me. But Helen and Pat, a hearty congratulations on the book. We are proud to have played a very small part in its publication. So just a few words on the History Trust, because I'm not going to take the stage and not give us a plug, because I love history, obviously, but we work with regional groups and metro groups, about 300 odd community museums and historical societies all across the state. And our role there is to enable local and regional history initiatives to flourish. And we've been doing this for 40 years, or 41 years, I think, if I'm being correct. And we also distribute $400,000 of grant funding to a broad range of projects annually, which is where this publication came about. And I think I went off script, so I'm going to shorten my speech. Look, I think Helen and Patricia are to be really commended, as I said. You've done an exceptional job. Coombe is it's an interesting figure, a larger-than-life figure in the history of Gawler, editor of the local Bunyip, MP. In this place that has this long First Nations history prior to colonisation, this special meeting place, but also those stories of industry and culture and education and the vibrant intellectual and sort of cultural hub that it's become and continues to be in as evidenced with this civic centre. So I think the book is an important contribution to the history of this place, and I'm really proud that we've played a part in that. But I understand it didn't just start with this book. As Karen alluded to, all roads lead back to the History Festival for me, and Pat, that comes as no surprise to me whatsoever that you and Helen first met as enthusiastic History Festival goers. Surprise, surprise. And I know Anthea is also in the crowd here today. I've spotted her. The History Festival is an annual festival that we run. It goes for the entire month of May. It's open access. There's over 500 events every year across the state, and at least a third are usually in regional South Australia. And it's attended by close to 150,000 people annually. It's a fabulous festival, and it's a really important aspect of how we as the History Trust support and enable the enjoyment of South Australian history for broad audiences. And I just think it really shows just how we're stronger together when we embrace and love and celebrate history. So Helen and Patricia met, and the rest, they say, is history. Through the Coombe's project, they developed the walking tour of Gawler, which we have just heard about. And if you haven't downloaded it and gone on the self-guided tour, I'd highly, highly recommend it. It's a great walking tour. And surprise, surprise, they put that tour on during the History Festival in first time, I think, 2017, and then in some subsequent years. But so now we've come full circle with the funding of this publication, a real book through our grants program. And I just love the serendipity and sort of that South Australian history community and what comes of the passion and the drive and expertise that exists everywhere across our state. And I just want to also make a quick mention of Gawler itself. The town of Gawler, the Mayor of Gawler, the council, They've all been so active in the History Festival since it first launched some 18 odd years ago, when it was known as History Week, and it's grown into a big month-long festival, which we all love. And we actually held our regional launch here in the new Civic Hall in 2019, which is a fabulous honour for us to come out here and launch the festival. This year, Gawler went and produced the Gawler History Network went and produced their own brochure, their own pamphlet of all of the history events that you could discover in this region, and it's fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And we were so chuffed, and so we sent people out. We got out there on the ground and went to events, and it's been fabulous. So it's really lovely to come back here today to be a part of this book. It's just great. It feels like we've come full circle as well. So I guess I will just wrap up there. I've had my 5 minutes, and otherwise I'm going to jump on my soapbox. But you can see me out there afterwards for a drink and talk about how amazing history is. And I'll try and work Star Wars in. I usually get Star Wars into all of my speeches. I just could not find an angle to get it in today, but come and see me later. So on behalf of Greg Mackey, I thank Helen and Pat for the invitation to speak today, and I thank the Mayor and the Town of Gawler for their ongoing championing of history. But also, last but not least, I also thank Wakefield Press, ever the supporter of South Australian history, and long-time collaborator with the History Trust of South Australia. And we're delighted to see South Australian history publications still flourishing in actual paper, which is absolutely... Everyone who knows me, I love digital. I want our history to be available to everyone online, but nothing beats a book in your hands. So thank you again, and congratulations. And I can't wait to see what Gawler and what you all do in History Festival 2023. Registrations open in about 3 days' time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Christy. You like history? Yeah. It's now my great honour again to introduce our official launcher of the book, South Australia's Deputy Premier, Susan Close. She's the member for Port Adelaide and has been for quite some time, but also has been Minister for Education, which I believe is where her doctor label comes from, Doctor Honorific. She's Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science, for Defence and Space Industries, but also for Climate, Environment and Water. So, Susan Close, please take the stage.
Thank you. Sometimes think I rival Scott Morrison in the number of portfolios I hold. Can I start by saying how grateful I am to have been born and to live and work on Aboriginal land. Always was, always will be, and as has been pointed out, has never been ceded. And I think in this room full of enthusiasts about history, it is particularly important to acknowledge the importance not only of looking at our history and understanding it, but understanding its impact and its messages for today. And we're heading into the year of the referendum, where we finally have an opportunity to fully acknowledge the wrongs of the past, the wrongs of the present, but also to finally fully celebrate Aboriginal culture and all that Aboriginal culture has to teach us from the past, but also from today and into the future. I have, I think, 3 topics that I've been asked to touch on in launching this book. One being this institute itself, another being the fact that E.H. Coombe eventually decided to join the Labor Party, and also the importance of the conscription debate and the anti-German debate. So the Institute, so E.H. Coombe had only 6 years of formal education, as did my grandparents. They were educated before secondary education was made compulsory in Britain. And for very many intelligent young people who were only afforded primary school, the existence of institutes or institutions like this one cannot be underestimated. And while we now have fully embraced not only compulsory education all the way through school, but indeed an expectation that education will continue past, we should never overlook the importance of the institutions that not only encouraged an education in the mechanics, the way in which one could learn a profession to be employed, but importantly to sustain intellectual life. And as I understand it, this institute was different to most mechanics institutes in that it did encourage that celebration of the intellectual life. And what great advantage Henry Coombe took from that education, how well he used that and shared it with others. Which brings me to his final decision to embrace the Labor Party. As I understand it, he did it because the Labor Party finally became worthy. And that chimes with me. I joined the Labor Party at 15, so it's not like I waited for the Labor Party to change. I embraced it early. But when I ran for the seat of Port Adelaide back in 2012, I was very conscious that the party was not popular anymore in that seat, that the party had done much to offend the good people of Port Adelaide, and that at that point they were prepared to look at an independent in order to give us a little wake-up call. So I have the rare, distinguished honour of having won that seat, the good seat of Port Adelaide, by only 2.8% in that by-election. And Jay Weatherill, who was recently made Premier before that and had asked me to stand for that election, pointed out to me that it wasn't that they had abandoned the party, it was that they felt that the party had abandoned them, and that it was my task to convince them again that the Labor Party was worthy of their vote. And I am very grateful to note that every election since then I've managed to increase my margin, and I think I'm at 72% currently, so I seem to have been reasonably convincing, as has the party. But what's important in that is that what Coombe looked for was the Labor Party to fully embrace democracy, that he wanted to join a party and would only support a party that was prepared to stand up for the full vote, the vote for everybody, and a vote that resulted in a democratic result. And I admire that. I admire that he held to his small L liberalism so dearly that he would not join a party and would remain independent until it was able to prove its worth to him. And I think it did that. And the Labor Party, despite various vagaries and despite various challenges, has long been the party that has sought to represent the people rather than individual interests. But Coombe wasn't content with putting democracy at the forefront of his political life. He was also utterly dedicated to making sure that democracy wasn't misused in order to exploit or to minimise the respect for minorities. And at that time, the deep concern he held was the way in which German Australians were being treated in the First World War. He was concerned about conscription, and he fought hard to remove conscription from the way in which men were asked to join up. But he was also concerned that there not be discrimination against people because of their heritage. And while I think it would come to as a great surprise to many Australians now that we were ever racist about German Australians, racism does not come as a surprise to us. It remains part of our culture, and part of our culture that constantly requires being challenged, which brings me neatly back to the question of the referendum that's before us, the question of whether we are capable of fully acknowledging that diversity is our strength. Obviously, E.H. Coombe recognised that and was prepared indeed to an extent to lay down his life. I understand he was in Semaphore, where I live, when he was part of a rally to address this concern about conscription and the treatment of German Australians. And that was when he had a hemorrhage and never recovered in 1917. So he was prepared to express his views so firmly that it cost him his life. a truly great Democrat and a truly great South Australian. But we wouldn't know about him, except for a select few, if there weren't institutions like the History Trust, if there weren't organisations or companies like Wakefield Press. Thank goodness we still have a printing press in South Australia. And if it weren't for individuals like Helen and Patricia, who are prepared to take the time to do the research and to share the stories. So I want to congratulate you and you and you for this magnificent work. And I'd like to congratulate all of you who on a Sunday afternoon have decided to come out and celebrate an old-fashioned thing called a book. I say that with love. I was recently at a breakfast it was organised by KeySab as part of my empire of portfolios, and a young man came up to me afterwards and said he'd come specifically to talk to me because he was a teacher at a high school, and he wanted to persuade me that we should no longer teach history because it should be replaced by environmentalism. And I think he thought that I might agree with him. And I sent him off with a flea in his ear. Of all the subjects that one might discourage students from learning, why on earth would you think history should be the one? We cannot know ourselves if we do not know our history. We cannot know the full range of decisions that we're capable of making, good and bad, if we don't understand our shared history. So thank you all for showing up and making me realise that I'm not alone in feeling that way. And again, a big congratulations, and I hereby launch your book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Close. And it's a pretty convincing argument you managed to make for the yes vote in the referendum by launching a book about a fella born in the 1870s. Yeah, in Australia. So that was a terrifically interesting speech, as have been all the talks. Thank you very much. And now, last and not least, we're going to ask one of the authors, Patricia Booth, to hop up on stage, please, and address us about the book. Thank you very much.
Look, I know this is not the Academy Awards, but I would like to say our thanks go to all who ensured that today would happen. Dr. Susan Close, representing the Labor government, Harry would be well pleased. The History Trust of South Australia, Dr. Christy Kakagi. Your financial support meant that the book was printed. Karen Redman and the town of Gawler. Karen was the catalyst, as you heard, for the book. She recognised there were two people who were headed down the same path, and she ensured that she brought them together. The Historical Society of South Australia. Andrew Buxton was the president at the time, and he encouraged me to apply for a grant. And of course, Michael Bollen, for believing in our project, and what a brave man. Thank you, Michael. We also acknowledge the work of our editor, Maddie Sexton, and the team at Wakefield Press, particularly Polly Butler-Grant, for arranging today's launch. Helen and I have had a long journey. It has been a wonderful experience to work with Helen. The amount of hours that she has given to research every last bit of evidence that she could find for this book has been unbelievable. And she's very generous to work with, as the Gawler Council are going to find out. Will you please join me in showing our appreciation to the people who made it all happen?
Thank you very much. Look, thank you all for attending. I'm very glad that Patricia thanked Maddie Sexton, who was the editor who worked in the book. It's also, we should thank Michael Deeves, who did the layout and typesetting, who was working with Finsbury. Actually, we printed in South Australia this time because we had about a week to get some books here. We would anyway. So, look, thank you for coming. You may have noticed there are books for sale just beyond. It's wonderful, marvellous to be in Gawler. I do love that drive now. I come from Myland. You just get on South Road. I've no sense of direction, none whatsoever. But it doesn't matter, you know, because you just drive and suddenly you're in Gawler, you know, or unless you're in Port Adelaide and you know you took the wrong turn. So, yeah, it's beautiful to be here. I love the town. So thank you very much.